And I thought that today we could do more like a retreat. Yesterday we were having a lot of talking, a lot of information, and maybe a little overwhelming for some of you. So today I thought we could do more meditations, different meditations about some of the topics we were looking at yesterday. And so from now until 1 o'clock we'll have a few sessions of meditation and some breaks in between. So to begin with, I still have cold, so I'm going to be sniffling and probably coughing a bit and blowing my nose in between. Sorry about that. Okay, so to begin with, let's check our motivation, our intention for being here. So this is something that the Tibetan Lamas always recommend, that before we begin doing meditation or any other kind of Dharma activity, that we check our motivation. So let's just take a few minutes to look into our mind and examine what was our reason, our motivation for coming here this morning. And when you do this, try to be really honest. Really check, why did I come here this morning? And don't worry if your reason wasn't a particularly positive one, because we can change that. But it's good to start by just being honest with ourselves. So just ask yourself that question. Why did I come here this morning? What was my reason, my motivation for coming here? So when you look into your mind, into your motivation, you might find that just naturally, spontaneously, you have a positive, a wholesome, an altruistic motivation for being here. You have a sincere, genuine wish to learn about the Dharma, the path to enlightenment. You have altruism, wishing to use your life in ways that are beneficial for others. So if you already have such a motivation, that's wonderful, fantastic. But if you find that your motivation might be somewhat mixed, maybe you have some altruism, wishing to benefit others, but there might be other attitudes of wanting something just for yourself, wanting just some immediate gratification, immediate pleasure, happiness, or wanting to overcome some problems that you yourself have. And that's okay. It's quite normal, quite natural to feel that way. And some of you might find that you're not really sure why you're here. You don't have a very clear idea. Maybe you just came here because a friend recommended that you come here and you are curious to find out what's going on here. Or you came here just to be with a friend who wanted to come and you didn't want to be home alone. So whatever we notice in our mind, whatever kinds of thoughts or feelings or attitudes that we have in our mind is fine. I mean, that's how we are, that's where we are at, that's how our mind is. But the Tibetan Lamas recommend that we try to have an altruistic motivation for the things that we do, that we try to expand our thoughts and our feelings and our attitudes beyond just thinking about me, just this one person, me, and my wishes and my needs and wanting to take care of my problems. Of course, it's natural that we feel that way, and it's not wrong to feel that way, but it's good if we can try to go beyond that and think about others. Because there are many other people and many other beings in the world, and they all share with us the wish to be happy, the wish to be free of suffering. And according to Buddhism, they all have the potential, the ability to become free of suffering and its causes and to achieve happiness and its causes. And it's good for them, and it's also good for us if we can expand our awareness and incorporate them in our wish to learn about and follow the spiritual path. So it's not at all harmful for us to do this, and in fact it's beneficial for us. It helps to open our heart, open our mind, increase our love and our compassion and our wisdom, and that is beneficial for us, for our own mind, our own happiness, our own attainment of enlightenment. So one way you can generate an altruistic motivation would be to think, whatever I do, I wish to be beneficial, not just for myself, but for others as well. May it bring peace and happiness, freedom from suffering and problems to as many other people and other beings as possible. And if you are comfortable with the idea of attaining enlightenment, becoming a Buddha, then you can bring that idea in as well. You can think, may whatever I do bring me closer to enlightenment, help me get closer to that state of enlightenment so that I can be beneficial to others as much as possible and help them reach enlightenment as well. So see if you can have that kind of motivation as your reason for being here and doing the meditations that we're doing here today. So in that way, all the things that we do here today will be beneficial for ourselves and others and will help us get closer to enlightenment. So let's start by doing some meditation on the breath. So the breath can be used as an object for developing calm abiding, concentration. So in that case, you try to keep your mind focused on the breath as much as possible and bring your mind, your awareness back to the breath when it wanders away. And if you prefer, If you are knowledgeable about the practice of mindfulness, using the breath to develop mindfulness, then you can do that practice as well. But even for developing mindfulness, it's usually recommended that we start by developing as much concentration as we can, having the ability to keep our mind focused on just one object, such as the breath, for as long as we can. So that's usually a good starting point. So let's spend about 15 minutes meditating on the breath, and then we'll have a short break, and then do a meditation on loving kindness. take a few minutes to stretch, relax, change your position if you need to. So one of the things I mentioned yesterday was the importance of having a good attitude towards oneself, rather than being unkind to oneself, being harsh on oneself, being critical, judgmental towards oneself. Because this is a tendency that many people in the West have, and sometimes it can happen at a sort of, I don't know, subconscious or unconscious level. It's not that we're deliberately doing it, but it's a habit, perhaps something we've been doing many years, maybe our whole life, and so it just keeps going on automatically. And this is not helpful in the spiritual path, because if we are mean to ourselves, unkind to ourselves, then we'll probably be that way towards other people as well. It's hard to be really have real unconditional love and compassion for others if we can't have it for ourselves. So having this self-critical attitude is a hindrance to being really open and loving and kind to others. And also it just creates a lot of turmoil in the mind, conflict and turmoil that isn't helpful for meditation. And so anyway, I mentioned yesterday that it's good to try to notice if this is happening in your mind, and if you do notice it, understand that it isn't a helpful thing, and it's something we shouldn't try to perpetuate and feed and increase and so forth, and instead try to work on and overcome. And one way of doing that is when we do meditation on loving kindness and compassion for others. Usually it's in the Buddhist tradition, we are taught to meditate on love and compassion for others, but they don't often mention having it for yourself. But this is something we need to do. If we do have a lack of love and kindness and compassion for ourselves, then we do need to cultivate it for ourselves. And so anyway, I thought to lead a meditation now on cultivating positive feelings, love and compassion, and including ourself, making sure that we don't leave ourself out, and then also meditate on love and compassion for others. So this will be an analytical meditation, using thought, using our ability to think, to analyze. So just do the best you can to stay focused on the meditation, and if the mind wanders away to other things that are not related to the meditation, then do your best to disengage your mind from those other objects and come back to the meditation that we're doing. So start by making sure that you're sitting in a comfortable position. And if there's tension anywhere in your body, tension, tightness, see if you can let go of that, let it melt and flow down and disappear. So now, see if you can go into your mind or into your heart and identify this feeling of wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So the Tibetan teachers often say things like, all sentient beings want to be happy, all sentient beings want to be free from suffering. So this is something that all beings have in common, something we share, a sort of common denominator. So see if you can recognize or get in touch with that feeling inside of yourself. And if you are able to identify it in yourself, see if you notice if there's any kind of resistance to it, or any sort of feeling that it's wrong to feel this way, I shouldn't feel this way, it's selfish, it's greedy. So see if you notice any sort of attitude like that, maybe a kind of shame or a kind of fear or rejection. No, I shouldn't let myself feel that way. Or a sense that I don't deserve to be happy. So if we do have any feelings like that, understand that it's not correct. Those feelings might be there because of certain experiences we had, or certain things we've learned, conditioning, or just coming up with our own ideas about things. So it's not correct to think that there's something wrong with wanting to be happy or wanting to be free of suffering. So according to Buddhism, this is simply a natural wish that everyone has, and it's also a kind of right, like a human right, or a right for living beings to be happy and free of suffering. We should be happy, we should be free of suffering. So there's nothing wrong with wanting that. So see if you can just accept and acknowledge without judgmentalness this feeling inside of you, wanting to be happy, wanting to be free of suffering. And see if you can have the feeling that it's okay to feel that way, and I do deserve to be happy. I deserve happiness and freedom from suffering. And if it's difficult for you to feel that way on your own, you might try imagining a Buddha, or if you want, you can imagine many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we are never alone. Wherever we are, all the time, there are countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around us, looking at us with pure, unconditional love and compassion. Which is similar to the feeling that a very loving mother or father has towards their small child. Just total love, completely accepting that person as they are, and just totally dedicated to doing whatever is possible to help them have happiness and be free of suffering. So the love and compassion that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have for us is like that, like a mother's love, like a father's love, but millions of times stronger and more pure. So see if you can try that. Imagine just one Buddha, or you can imagine many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas looking at you with total acceptance, unconditional love and compassion. And try to imagine how you appear in their eyes, in their mind, how they feel towards you. So if you can get a feeling, a taste of that unconditional love and compassion that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have for us, and see if you can generate that same feeling towards yourself. See if you can see yourself as worthy, deserving of happiness, peace, freedom from suffering. See if you can really wish those things for yourself. And if it's difficult to feel that, don't worry, it's okay. Maybe you could just try to say to yourself words like, may I be happy. I wish myself to be happy. May I be free from suffering and problems. I wish myself to be free of suffering and problems. So even if you can just say those words to yourself, that is a start, like a first step towards having more love and compassion for yourself. And now, let's see if we can generate that same feeling towards some other people. Start by thinking of someone that you already have positive feelings towards. So it could be someone in your family, like a child, if you're a parent, or a sibling, brother or sister, or one of your parents, or a very dear friend, or even an animal, a pet, someone you already love and care about. So bring that person to mind. Try to have a mental picture of them. You could imagine them right in front of you, here, right now, or just think of where that person is right now. And contemplate that that person is basically just like you. In their heart, in their mind, they have the wish to be happy and to not suffer. And then see if you can generate the wish in your mind and your heart for that person to be happy, to have happiness, and to not suffer. And it's also very nice to think about specific things that will make the person happy. And then you can imagine yourself giving those things to the person, or just imagine those things happening, coming to the person, being there in the person's life, and imagine that person being happy, experiencing happiness, looking happy. let's do the same with another person. So bring to mind someone else that you know and already have good feelings for. Again, it could be someone in your family, or a friend, or a pet, or a neighbor. So have a mental picture of that person. Either imagine they're in front of you, or think of wherever they are right now. And then contemplate that that person, just like you and just like the first person you thought about, has within their mind, within their heart, the wish to be happy and to not suffer. Then see if you can go one step further and wish that they could have happiness and to not experience suffering and problems. And then you can think of specific things that will enable the person to be happy. Then you can imagine giving those things to the person, or imagine them just receiving them or having them coming into their life and looking happy, being happy. Now let's try the same with a third person, this time someone we're not so close to, someone a little more distant from us, but not an enemy, not someone we hate. So you could think of someone in your neighborhood, or someone you work with, or someone in your family that you're just not that close to. You don't know them that well and don't have strong feelings for them. So try to have a mental picture of that person, and then contemplate that that person, just like you and just like the other two people you thought about, has within their mind, within their heart, the same wish to be happy, to have good experiences, and to not suffer, to not have any bad experiences. then try to take the next step of wishing the person to be happy and wishing them to not suffer. And then, if you can, try to imagine specific things that will enable the person to be happy. And imagine either giving those things to the person or the person just having them, receiving them in their life and being happy, looking happy. So, to conclude the meditation, see if you can understand that what we contemplated during this meditation with regard to ourself and these other people is true for everyone else, all people and all living beings. Every being that has a mind, thoughts, feelings, consciousness, awareness, they all have this basic wish to be happy, to have good experiences, to have their needs fulfilled, their wishes fulfilled. And they all don't want to suffer. They don't want pain, they don't want problems, they don't want bad experiences. So this is true for everyone. And if we can gradually make ourselves more aware, more familiar with this, then it really helps us to have a more open heart, a more open mind towards others, and paves the way to have love and compassion, and then act in ways that are helpful for others and avoid doing things that are harmful for others. Okay, so when you feel ready to end the meditation, you can slowly open your eyes, relax your sitting position. I was just thinking about one time I was giving a talk about loving kindness and, this practice of wishing all beings to have happiness and so forth. And then one of the people in the audience asked me a question. She said that her mother is, I don't know, I can't remember the word she used, but kind of very greedy. Like very materialistic and always wanting more and more and more things, clothes and jewelry and so on and so forth. Like she just, there's no end to what she wants. And so she said, so when I'm meditating on loving kindness for my mother, is it appropriate for me to really wish her to have all these things that she wants? So I thought, oh, that's a really interesting question. I never really thought about that before. But then I thought, well, maybe it would be more appropriate to wish her mother to be satisfied, to have satisfaction. Because clearly having more and more and more things isn't really what she needs to be happy, right? And that's not going to bring her happiness. So when I do this meditation, I don't just think about things like that. May they have money, may they have food, may they have clothes. Of course, if they're homeless and they're hungry, then of course, you know, it's appropriate to wish them to have homes and food and so forth. But then I also think about the inner qualities that will enable the person to be really happy, you know, like inner peace, inner satisfaction, less greed, less dissatisfaction, those kind of things. So anyway, I just thought to mention that. So I think you can use your imagination and when it comes to thinking about what others really need in order to have happiness, what will really bring them happiness, and what will really relieve their suffering, then it's good to go beyond just the material things and think more in terms of the internal qualities, internal experiences, you know, that will really enable them to have happiness and peace. Does that make sense? But I like this part of the meditation of not just wishing them to be happy, but actually imagining the specific things that will make them happy and giving them. So it's actually mentioned in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, the great stages of the path to enlightenment. And when he describes the meditation on love, he says you can imagine giving them things that will make them happy. So I find it, yeah, it's really nice. So it also makes you feel a little bit closer to them, you know, like there's actually a sort of connection there. Okay, so how about we have a break for about 20 minutes, and we'll come back and do some more meditation. So yesterday we were looking at different topics, mainly the two truths, and looking at the way that they are explained by one of the Buddhist schools, the Vibhashika school. And basically their view is that ultimate truth or absolute truth are the basic building blocks of matter and also mind. So they believe that there are these very tiny particles of matter which can't be broken down further, and those are the building blocks for everything else. So our bodies and all the things in the world around us, the material things, the physical things, are made up of these little particles. And those little particles are considered to be ultimate truths because they can't be broken down any further, basically. It's like you can take the body apart, and when you take the body apart, then you kind of lose the body, you know, it's no longer really a body. But you know, you get down to these tiny little particles and you can't take them apart, you can't break them down any further. So they are like ultimately true. And the same with other material things like a chair or a table. You know, you can take it apart, separate it out into its components, and then you lose the table. You know, there's no longer a table there. But you come down to these tiny little particles, and they are like real. They are real. And the same with the mind. They say that it's not so easy to break the mind down, to take the mind apart. But they say it can be, at least mentally, separated into components, and eventually you come down to these tiny little, not physically tiny, but these very brief moments of mind. And those are the things that make up the mind. You know, the combination of those, the collection of those make up the whole stream of the mind. So they say these small particles of matter and these brief moments of mind are ultimate truths. And then the things that are made up by these, my bodies, tables, and all the material things in the world around us, these are just conventional truths, relative truths, because they can be taken apart and broken down, and then, you know, you lose them. They no longer appear the way they did before. So they're just, I mean, they do talk about things being labeled or being imputed. You know, it's like we say body is just imputed onto this mass of particles. Yeah, but it's not like a real solid thing in and of itself. And the same with a table. You know, table is just imputed onto this collection of all these little minute particles. You know, but it's not like a real, ultimately real thing in and of itself, because you can take it apart and then you lose the table. So that seems to be their way of thinking. And this view is not the final or subtlest view of reality, but it's still very helpful for us, especially when it comes to dealing with our disturbing emotions. I read something in this book which is about the two truths from the point of view of the different Buddhist schools. So I thought this might be useful to share. He says, this presentation of the two truths, as explained by this school, the Vaibhashika school, brings home the message that we have an ingrained predilection to see a gross sort of wholeness in ourselves, our bodies, and the external objects we encounter. So we tend to see things as whole, not made up of all these parts. And we fail to reflect upon the fact that such phenomena are imputed to collections of parts. Consequently, in our minds, they take on a solidity and substantiality which they actually do not have. So the conventional truths of this school, the Vaibhashika school, are subject to disintegration, but we ignorantly apprehend them as unchanging and permanent. We mistakenly see them as independent realities, when in fact they rely on the aggregation of things other than themselves. And all these misapprehensions lead us into afflictive emotions, such as desire and hatred, and these afflictions in turn motivate the actions that trap us in the cycle of suffering. So, you know, because we don't see things as just composed of parts, you know, they seem to be much more solid and real than they really are. And we tend to see them as permanent and unchanging. So because of seeing things in that way, then that leads us to have attachment, grasping, desire, clinging, wanting more of these phenomena. And but then with the things that we don't like, that are unpleasant to us somehow, we have the opposite of, feeling of aversion, wanting to push them away or maybe even harm them, destroy them, and so on. So these emotions are based on seeing things as much more real and solid and permanent than they really are. So it is useful to contemplate the point of view of this the school. And then he goes on to say, yogis, meditators, can notice and experience the very subtle particles and partless instance of consciousness. So they say with the practice of meditation, if you really develop your meditation, then you can actually directly see all these little particles that make things up. You can see things are just made up of these impermanent particles. And also you can see your mind is also made up of just these very, very brief moments of consciousness that come and go and come and go and come and go. And so if you have that experience, then you're able to get rid of the ignorant conceptions of a permanent, partless, independent self, because you look at your body and mind and you see just all these particles, these little things that make up the body and mind. You don't find a real permanent self there. And so by doing this, freeing yourself from these wrong conceptions, then you can eventually attain nirvana, freedom from suffering. So anyway, that's just related to what we were talking about yesterday. But then I came across a meditation in a book by a Kagyu Lama, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyaltsen, which is called Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness. So he explains how you can meditate on the emptiness or the selflessness of these different schools. And that helps you gradually reach the Madhyamika explanation of emptiness, which is much more subtle. So I was thinking that perhaps we could do this meditation together. If I can find it. Where did I put it? Yeah, here it is. Yeah, so in this meditation, because yesterday I talked about the 5 aggregates, those who were here yesterday, remember the 5 aggregates? So you sort of, in the meditation, going through our 5 aggregates and just seeing how, they're just made up of all these parts. And if we try to find a real, permanent self existing on its own among all these parts, then it becomes very difficult. So it can help us to get to the point where we're less attached to, less grasping at our sense of self. Okay, so how about if we first start with some calm abiding meditation on the breath to calm the mind down, get the mind more focused, more concentrated, and then I'll lead this meditation. Okay, so now, still keeping your mind as much as possible in a calm and clear and focused state. See if with one part of your mind you can just try to notice your sense of self, sense of I. And as I mentioned yesterday, try to do this with the same kind of approach that you would if you were a photographer wanting to take a photo of a wild animal who would run away if you made any noise or any sharp movements. So we want to be able to catch a glimpse, a sense of our sense of self, our sense of I, in a kind of subtle and sneaky way, so that it doesn't just vanish. So they say, just use one part of your mind to observe your inner world, your inner state, and try to get a sense of this feeling of I, which we have almost all the time, if not all the time. The feeling that there's a real I, a real me, here, somewhere within our body and mind. And if you have difficulty recognizing or noticing the sense of self, I, me, it might be helpful to remember an experience where you had some strong emotion coming up, anger or fear or excitement, attachment. So if in the last few days or the last week you experienced a strong emotion, try to remember that experience as vividly as you can, and then try to detect the sense of I that is feeling that emotion, that is sort of behind the emotion, feeling the emotion. So our sense of I, this me, seems like a real thing, like it's really there, existing on its own. But usually we don't examine it, we don't question it, we don't analyze it, we just believe in it. So if this I really does exist, if it's a real thing, then if we do investigate it, then it should become even more clear that it is a real thing. It's a bit like if you ever have the experience of seeing a mirage, if you're in the desert, or sometimes it can happen in a city if the sun is really hot, shining on concrete or asphalt. then there's this appearance on the surface of what looks like water, a puddle of water or a lake or a river. So it really looks like there's water sitting there. But if that was true, then when we walk closer, we go closer to it, it should become even more clear that there is water there. But what happens is when we get closer, we don't find any water, and even the mirage itself disappears. So we're going to try to do a similar kind of thing with our sense of self, or I, which seems to be there, seems to be real. So we're going to try to get closer to it and see if it's really true. So our sense of I often feels like something in our body. So let's start by looking at our body, checking to see if the I is some part of our body or existing somewhere in our body. So just spend a bit of time going through your body. You can start with your head going down, or you can start with your toes going up. And just go through your body and see if you can find something in your body, some part of your body, which you can point to as being the I, the self, this real self. Now, in case you do think that the I corresponds with some part of the body, then investigate that idea further. For example, many people may feel that their I is inside their head, and maybe it's the brain or some part of the brain. So think about that. Does that really make sense? I mean, for one thing, we can't see our brain. Our brain isn't visible to us. And yet, do we not have a visual image of ourselves, how we appear? For example, when we look in the mirror, we see ourselves in the mirror, and then we may think, oh, I look pretty good today, or I don't look very good today, or, you know, we have different kind of thoughts, comments about ourselves when we look in the mirror. But when we look in the mirror, do we see our brain? And also the image that we have of ourselves, how we appear, how we look. Does that really correspond with the brain? How the brain looks, how the brain appears? I mean, we can't see our own brain, but scientists and doctors do sometimes dissect brains and know what brains look like. So it's this sort of mass of gray-colored jelly-like stuff inside of our skull. So if you think about what a brain really looks like, does that really correspond with your sense of I and what you look like? And also when it comes to other people, because we also have a feeling that they exist as a real person, a real self. So when we see a friend, for example, someone we really like, we see that person and we think, oh, they're so-and-so, and we feel really happy to see that person. But when that experience happens, are we seeing that person's brain? Is it their brain that we feel happy to see? And it can also be helpful to contemplate what this school talks about with regard to the body, how the body is made of basically these very, very, very minute particles of matter, which according to them can't be broken down any further. They're like partless particles. So whether that's true or not, we don't know, but it is true that our body is made of many, many, many tiny particles of matter. So it isn't like one whole solid thing. It's just a mass of all these tiny particles. And is it possible to find among all these tiny particles something we can point to as being me, I, myself? So you might think that it's pretty obvious that the I isn't the body or some part of the body. But then there's the mind. It might seem to make more sense to locate the I within the mind. But the mind also is made up of parts. It isn't just one whole solid thing. So in the Buddhist tradition, the mind is divided up into 4 of the 5 aggregates. And even these 4 aggregates are themselves made up of many, many parts. So let's just go through these 4 aggregates and check to see if any of them might correspond with our sense of I, or self. So the first is feelings. Feelings is actually a mental factor, an ever-present mental factor, meaning every single moment, with every experience we have, there's always a feeling component there. And it could be a pleasant feeling, or an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. But one of those feelings is always there, always present. Every time we see something, or hear something, or think about something, okay, so with every single moment, one of those feelings is there. But feeling is something transitory, impermanent. It comes and goes. It's not that a pleasant feeling is there every single moment, moment after moment, hour after hour. But rather, a pleasant feeling comes, it lasts a moment, and then it's gone. Then there might be another pleasant feeling coming, or it could be an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. So each feeling is like a bubble. It just arises, it comes up, and then after one moment it's gone. It doesn't last. So just observe your experience. Try to notice, try to recognize this mental factor of feeling, and try to recognize how it is momentary or transitory, coming, going, always changing, not permanent, not solid. So if you can recognize the transitory nature of feelings, then does it make sense to think that we can find our sense of self, or I, within our feelings? That the I is the feelings? Another thing is it not the case that when we have some feeling, we say or we think something like, I feel good, or I don't feel good, I feel bad. So when we say things like that, we're actually making a distinction between I and feeling. I is something separate from feeling, something that experiences feeling rather than the feeling itself. Now, the next aggregate is sometimes it's called discrimination, or some translators use recognition or perception. So don't worry so much about the name, but try to understand what it is. This is another mental factor, and it's one that is ever present, every moment, every experience. It's that part of the mind that is able to distinguish one thing from another. For example, now we have our eyes closed, but we can't close our ears, so we hear sounds, and when a sound is heard, we are able to distinguish. That's a car, that's footsteps, that's music, that's a voice, that's a clock ticking. Okay, so we are able to distinguish one kind of object from another. So we can do that with all of our senses: hearing, seeing, smell, taste, bodily sensations, and also the mental experiences like thoughts and memories and so on. So this mental factor recognizes and distinguishes So just take a few minutes to try to notice this particular mental factor of discrimination or recognition, and ask if it makes sense that you can locate your sense of self or I in that mental factor, taking into consideration that it too is something impermanent, something arising and passing. So it comes up, it lasts a moment, and then it's gone. Another thing to consider is that we have the tendency to feel our sense of self or I as something separate from recognition. Like, for example, when let's say we see a person we know and we say, "Oh, I recognize that person. That person is so and so." So when we say that, or we have that kind of experience, aren't we saying that the I is something separate from recognition? There's I, and then there's recognition. They're two different things rather than one and the same thing. And now let's look at the fourth aggregate, which is sometimes called compositional factors. And this is a kind of basket, storage container, in which all the other mental factors are placed. So we have many different mental factors. Some of them are what we call delusions, or disturbing emotions: anger, jealousy, pride, laziness, attachment, and so on. And some of them are positive, virtuous, like faith, love, compassion, non-attachment, non-hatred, and so on. And some of them are neutral, like regret, because regret could be positive or negative depending on what we feel regret for. There's many mental factors included in this aggregate. And all these mental factors are, again, transitory, impermanent. They arise, they last a while, maybe a moment, maybe they last a few moments, but eventually they pass. They're not permanent. So you could just think about your emotions, for example, different emotions that you experience as you go through the day. Try to recognize how they are transitory. They come and they go. None of them are permanent. None of them are always there. And so ask yourself, is any of those the I, the me, the sense of a real I, a real me that seems to be there inside of me somewhere, existing all on its own? And again, as before, Isn't it the case that when we do experience some emotion, we have a sense of the I being something separate from the emotion rather than the emotion itself? We say or we feel, we think, I am angry, or I feel jealous, or I feel regret or embarrassed or frightened or whatever it is. The I seems to be something else other than the emotion. So there's one last aggregate, the fifth aggregate, which is called consciousness. And this includes what in Buddhism are called the 6 types of consciousness. So we have 6 different consciousnesses related to 6 senses. So we have 5 physical senses: seeing, hearing, smell, taste, and then the body sense, feeling sensations in our body. And then the 6th consciousness is the mental consciousness, and that includes thoughts, memories, dreams, those types of experiences not related to our 5 senses. So this 5th aggregate is also a kind of basket, a storage container for all these different types of experiences, which are going on all the time. There's always something happening in our mind. And there can be several different things at the same time. We can be seeing and hearing at the same time, and thinking, and so on. But each of these experiences is momentary, impermanent, not permanent, not steady, not always there, but rather arising, lasting a moment, passing, and the next one arises and passes, and so on. So again, they're like bubbles coming up and disappearing within a very short time. So that's how our consciousness is. It's not just this solid, steady, whole state of awareness or experience, but it's rather like a stream made up of many minute, very short, very brief experiences that come and go, come and go, come and go. Just try to get a sense of that, of what consciousness is. And then ask yourself if you can locate your sense of self or I within consciousness. Can you point to any of the instances of consciousness as saying, that is I, that is me? And again, as before, when we do have an experience of any of these 6 types of consciousness, is it not the case that we feel the I to be something separate from it. For example, when we see something, we have the experience of seeing, visual perception. Don't we think, I see? That the I is something separate from seeing. The same with thinking. Don't we say, I think? So if that is the case, what is that I that sees, that thinks, that hears, and so forth? So we've gone through the 5 aggregates, which is the Buddha's way of explaining what a person is, or what we are made of. That we are made of these 5 aggregates, or in a simpler way we can just say body and mind. And each of these, body and mind, is in turn made of many, many, many parts, which are all impermanent. They come, they go, constantly changing, nothing fixed, nothing static, nothing permanent, always there, always the same. So that's the Buddhist explanation, but you might not agree with that. You might think there is something that is permanent, that is fixed, that is constant. It doesn't just come and go. So if you do have that idea or that suspicion, then ask yourself, well, what is that thing? What exactly is it? And where is it? Where can it be found? But then on the other hand, you might now be thinking, well, maybe this means that I don't exist. I'm not really here at all. There is no self. There is no me. There is no I. So that's not true either. We do exist. We are a person. We have thoughts and feelings. We have a body. We need to eat and sleep and take care of ourselves. We relate to other people. We do things. We meditate. And if we meditate well, one day we can become an enlightened being, a Buddha. So there is someone here. There is a person. There is a self. The question is, how do we exist? What is the way we exist? So the Buddhist answer to that is, there isn't a permanent, unchanging, fixed, independently existing self or I, existing on its own from its own side. Rather, there's just this collection, this combination of physical and mental components, changing all the time. And in relation to that, we have the convention, the name, the label, I, me, myself, person, or whatever our name happens to be. So the I, the person, is just imputed, just labeled in relation to this mass of changing physical and mental components. Okay, so when you feel ready to come out of the meditation, you can slowly open your eyes, relax. So, I don't know if you got to any conclusion in that meditation, but ideally the conclusion we come to is that we can't really find a fixed, solid I or me within our body and mind. But if you didn't come to that conclusion, that's okay. Because they say realistically, this is a kind of investigation we have to do again and again and again, and over a long period of time, years and years and years and years. And we can't expect that just within one meditation session or a few meditation sessions we're suddenly going to get it. So it's better to think of it in terms of an ongoing investigation, analysis, questioning, exploration, you might think, a journey to try to understand what is the self, how does the self exist, and so on. And also, I don't think it's a good idea to just think, oh, well, the Buddha said there's no self, therefore that's true, and not go through any investigation. I think a lot of people do that, Oh, I'm a Buddhist, and Buddhism says there's no self, therefore I believe that there's no self. So that's not going to do much good. So, Buddha always said we have to check things out for ourselves. So he made this discovery of selflessness, but we have to check it out if that's true or not. And maybe it's not. Maybe we will find a self that the Buddha didn't find. So, but anyway, the point is, it's important to do our own investigation, but it's also important to study, because they say there are kind of dangers if you're not careful, just like when you're making a journey somewhere, going on a trek, for example, you're going on a trek in the mountains. You have to be careful that you really know where you're going, because otherwise you might go in the wrong direction, you might fall off a cliff, you might end up in a bear cave. So, we want to make sure we know the right path and we follow the right path and avoid the dangers that can happen. So they say it's very important to study, to listen to teachings, and read and think about and ask questions if we don't understand something, so that we get a correct intellectual understanding of selflessness, but then also meditate. So you sort of go back and forth, listening to teachings, thinking, studying, and meditating, going back and forth between those two things, and in time your understanding gets more and more clear and correct. Anyone want to ask a question at this point in time?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking there is some self.
There is?
Yeah, I can have this experience
Yeah.
that there is a self. And I was thinking, in which aggregate is that more like a memory and a thought? And I was thinking maybe it's a combination of feeling and thought and memory, or where? Because I think the sense of having a self, at least for me, it exists.
Yeah. You're not the only one. Because, you know, even if we did a meditation like this and you end up feeling, yeah, there really isn't a self. But then you go outside and you find that you've got a parking ticket on your car, or, you know, a bird poops on your head or something. You know, the self, the sense of a real self will come up again. So,
Where is that?
well, that's why we're supposed to keep checking, investigating. And they say especially if we, at those times when we do feel some strong emotion, those are the times when the sense of self, or I, a real I, it seems most vivid, most clear, most strong. So at those times, you know, just to ask yourself, okay, what is this self? What is it? Where is it? How does it exist? Is it really something I can point to?
Because I thought also it's definitely like in all those parts feels like they are part of the self. But then the feeling of that self is not the same as something that's changing here and there. And when you went through individually those aggregates, how a feeling comes and goes, that's not the experience of the self.
The self seems to be something that doesn't come and go, right?
Yes,
it seems to be
yes.
like it's constant, it's always there.
Yes, and the feeling of it being there is there for me, I think, all the time, but different intensity.
Yeah.
Maybe if you do something very engaging, it can diminish, but I'm just wondering, where is that sense?
Yeah, well, that's up to you. You have to discover that. If you believe you have a self, you have to.
No, I don't really believe it.
You feel it. I know. You know, there's the last Mind and Life conference. This is where the Dalai Lama meets with different scientists and so on. So the latest one was in December. It was held in Drepung Monastery in India, and all the sessions are on YouTube. You can watch them. And the particular topic they were discussing was perception, conception, and the self. And there was a really good presentation by Jay Garfield, who's an American. He's a professor of philosophy, and he started off as a professor of Western philosophy, and then at some point he encountered Nagarjuna and became really interested in Nagarjuna's philosophy, Madhyamika. And he became, he learned Sanskrit and Tibetan. He translated, Nagarjuna's text on wisdom, fundamental wisdom, and so on. So now he's kind of an expert in Nagarjuna's philosophy. So anyway, he gave a presentation. It's in session 5. If you're interested to watch it, it's very interesting because he's going through the different, like from the point of view of Western philosophy, because this is a subject in Western philosophy as well. And I was really interested in that. I wondered, so what do Western philosophers say about the self? Yeah, what's their view? So he kind of he made a summary of, he didn't mention specific names except Descartes at one point, but he just said these are the different views in Western philosophy about the self, how the self exists. And then he kind of pointed out how they're all wrong. And he's definitely a Madhyamika. He's definitely agrees with Nagarjuna. But anyway, it's just really interesting if you're interested in this whole subject of the self and exploring the self and finding the self and so on. And
I don't know if it's a question, it's more a consideration. I think when you experience, if you can experience that doesn't exist, the self is also quite scary.
yeah.
I think you need to be with someone who helps you to do it, or can be with you, kind of guiding you in this, because if you are not ready for it and you experience it by natural or by chance or not easy.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know by my... I haven't had that experience, but a couple of years ago I met this guy who had, I don't know, he was attending some meditation course or retreat or whatever, and there was a meditation on emptiness. And he had that experience, and he said it was the most terrifying experience he ever had, and he just ran away from meditation for a couple of years. He just didn't want to do any more meditation for a couple of years. He was so scared. And then he came back, and he actually met Lama Zopa Rinpoche and was able to talk to Rinpoche about it, and Rinpoche gave him some advice. But so yeah, it can be quite scary. And I think that's why they say it's important to really study, to have a good intellectual understanding of this whole topic, and also the context. You know, if you take it out of context.
What do you do when you have this knowledge, then with your life? Do you become, is another consideration, you cannot become detached from human activities and from loving in a human way, even though you know that everything doesn't exist, you know, in the way you thought. So also, what do you do with this? You need to be guided, I think.
Yeah, well, that's why they do
Because
say.
you can detach yourself completely. Then.
Yeah, that's why they say it's really important to have spiritual teachers on the path and not just, you know, try to follow it on your own. I remember when I first went to Dharamsala back in the early 70s, I heard about this woman. I didn't meet her, but I heard people talking about her. She was a Western woman, and I guess she'd come and started learning Buddhism and meditating, and she seemed to think she had an experience of emptiness, but it seems that it was actually nihilistic, because she got into this state of mind where she thought, I don't exist, nothing is real, nothing is true, and she just became like a vegetable. You know, she wasn't taking care of herself, eating or anything, talking to people. So eventually she had to be taken to a mental hospital. So that's why you have to be really, really careful in this whole this whole exploration, and also in context, to understand what's the purpose of all of this. So in the Bodhisattva's path, the Mahayana path, emptiness always needs to be conjoined with compassion and love. It's like the two wings of a bird. So if you take away the compassion and the love, the method side of the path, and only focus on the wisdom side, then you might lose your sense of purpose in relating to other people and helping other beings and so forth. So, and if you look at where emptiness comes in the Lam Rim, you know, it's right at the end. It's not at the beginning. So, you know, it's like emptiness comes on top of all these other topics. So if you've really trained well in the other topics, and then you get to emptiness, it's dealt with in that context. But on the other hand, like I was saying yesterday, some people are most attracted to emptiness. You know, they read a book about it or they hear about it, and that's the thing that really attracts them to Buddhism. But ideally, you know, in the correct way, emptiness should be dealt with as part of a whole path, rather than as, you know, a separate thing by itself. Because then I think there's more danger of getting it wrong and possibly even ending up with some unhealthy state of mind. So yeah, they do say it's very important to have teachers guiding you, to study, to listen to teachings and have a correct understanding of it. And if you do, you know, try to explore the topic in meditation, if you have any problems, go back to your teachers, or at least people who are more knowledgeable, more experienced than you. You know, so it needs to be done in a healthy way. And also the motivation. Why am I doing this? You know, the motivation is really to become enlightened, to help all living beings. So
thinking there is something that seems to be constant, which is these basic qualities of the mind, clear and knowing. So that knowing or the awareness itself seems to be constantly there, regardless of the changing reflections or content, or so whether that could be a valid basis to impute as self, I don't know, but it seems to be there, unchanging.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a question I always came up against. That okay, it's obvious that the body, none of the parts of the body is the self or the I, but the mind, because the mind is this thing that has been existing from beginningless time, and it will exist forever. Why can't we say that is the self, that is the I? And there was a book by the Dalai Lama, and there were questions and answers. People were asking him. So that question came up, and his answer was that the mind is, I mean, you said it yourself, it's the basis of imputation for the self, but it's not the self. So this is actually something that comes up in Madhyamika philosophy. It's a big part of that that there are these two, I mean, they use the terminology, the imputed object and the object of, the imputed object and the basis of imputation. Yeah, so like for example, we call this a watch. Okay, so watch is the imputed object. Okay, this is an imputed object. And then the basis of imputation are the parts, the glass, the metal, the dials, the little wheels and cogs inside, so all the parts that make it up. And Madhyamika philosophy says they can't be the same thing. The imputed object and the basis of imputation, meaning the parts that are labeled as that, they can't be the same thing. Now this is a little tricky, a little complicated, but it's the same with the self or the I. So we say we have a body and a mind, or 5 aggregates, which in turn are made up of zillions of different parts and particles. So that's the basis of imputation. This collection, this mass of physical and mental components, that's the basis of imputation. But then the self, the person, is imputed on top of that and is not the basis of imputation. If the I was the basis of imputation, we should be able to point to something in there as being the I, but we can't. So those are said to be two different things. But you have to kind of think about this and contemplate this. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I know Lama Zopa Rinpoche talks about this a lot, about and gives reasons as to why the basis of imputation and the object imputed aren't the same. Yeah.
I also think the experience is very different if you get angry and have a sense of, oh no, this is not right, I protect myself. Or if you sort of get a little bit close to that part of the mind that is like reflecting content, is a little bit peaceful and open, but normally for me when I experience myself, it's not that I'm very much close to that basis of imputation, like which is this, I don't know, that you could simulate as a movie screen, for example. So I think in some meditation technique it's possible to get a bit closer to identify with that, but the taste of that is very different from how I normally experience a self. It's more tight and me, this kind of feeling.
Mm. Well, they just say that whatever your experience of self is, anytime you have a feeling of self, then make that the object of your meditation. Focus on that.
Yeah.
Try to identify that, try to explore that, try to question what is that thing. And the same like fear. They say if you do have a feeling of fear coming up, you know, the tendency is to want to run away, you know, run away from this meditation. But they say ideally, and it's actually a good thing. The Dalai Lama says this as well. He said one time he was reading a text, one of the texts about emptiness, about this, you know, lack of a self or an I, and he actually got a taste of selflessness, and he said it was like being hit by lightning. He felt like he'd been hit by lightning. It was just this shock. So they say it's actually a good thing to have that kind of experience, because that means you're getting close to it. So they say if you do have that experience of fear, it's good to look at that. Who is it that's afraid? Yeah, I mean, fear is a state of mind, of course. That's a mental state. That's one of the emotions, one of the aggregates. So that's the mind. But who or what is the I that is afraid? You know, there's a sense of an I who is afraid, an I who feels threatened. So they say that's actually a great opportunity to look for the I that seems to be so real. So if you can stay with the meditation, not run away, stay with it and just focus on that I that feels afraid. Okay, so who are you? What are you? Where are you? How do you exist? Are you really there? It's hard to do, but if you could do that, then you might just be able to get an experience of emptiness.
Yes, I was thinking about the karmic imprints. They are part of the composition factors. So
Yes,
karma.
yeah. Karmic imprints
Yes.
are included in the fourth aggregate.
Yes.
So the fourth aggregate, I had mentioned that it includes all the other mental factors, but it includes other things as well, such as karmic imprints. Yeah. So that's part of the fourth aggregate. So those are also impermanent phenomena, changing moment by moment. Yeah.
I think also, I also felt fear of letting go the self, because then you think if I don't have self, what do I have instead? So it feels you feel very unstable, and so what then? Like you don't have. I just feel I don't know what should I do then, or what would happen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a stop there, and you don't know. So that's where you.
Well, that's why it's important to study, because if you correctly, you study and you have the correct understanding of emptiness in the intellectual way, then you know that emptiness isn't saying we don't exist at all. Selflessness doesn't mean there is no self at all. It means that there's no real, permanent, independently existing self, as there seems to be, as we feel there is. But that doesn't mean there is no self at all, because as I said at the end, we do exist. There is a body here. There is this combination of particles, cells and atoms and molecules. And there is a mind, with all these thoughts and feelings and emotions and so forth, and karmic imprints. So that exists. And so then what is the self? That does exist. Self is just what is labeled. It's like a convention, something conventionally existing. I, me, Sangye Khadro, Kathleen, Martin, Maria, whatever our names are. Okay? So that does exist. You do exist. And you may be a mother, you may be a partner to somebody, you may have a job doing this, doing that. So all those things exist. All those things are true, but just not in the way we normally see it. Because our normal experience is there's some kind of real thing existing all on its own, independent, permanent, constant, unchanging, And we usually go through life, most people go through life without questioning, what exactly is that, It seems like it's there, and what was that quotation you mentioned yesterday from Lama Zopa Rinpoche?
Well, I didn't listen to you right now, but he said, everybody believes in the self. Everybody making the self his boss. Nobody knowing what the self is. Very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes the sense of self appears like that, like a boss. Like there's, it's the boss, the CEO, the one in charge, the king, the president, the prime minister, whatever, there's this thing inside that's in charge and running the show and directing everything. And it's as though we are like a slave, like a servant, like the employee of this boss, and always obeying its orders, always doing what it tells us to do. And yet we never kind of turn around and look, well, who are you anyway? who do you think you are telling me what to do? So that's what we're... Huh?
And also like telling who.
Yeah, who's telling who? Because it sometimes seems like there's two selves, like this whole thing about I hate myself, this feeling of I hate myself. So who is the I that hates who? So sometimes it's good to just ask those kind of questions of myself. Well, who do I think I am? So it's more, like I say, it's more just an ongoing exploration. It's not something we're going to decide today or even this year or even this lifetime necessarily. Sometimes the lamas say, well, this is something we can keep exploring for many lifetimes before we finally get it. So don't be in a big hurry and don't get stressed about it. Just see it like I mentioned yesterday. They say just to start having doubt, to start having questions about this is such a good thing, as opposed to just going through life, just following the orders of this boss that we don't even know. We don't even know who it is, what it is, if it's really there or not. So to just start asking these kind of questions is already very helpful. And not, it's about ourselves, but it's also about others and the world, reality, Is the way that I see things, the way I see others, the way I see the world, is it really correct? Do I really have a correct perception of everything? Or maybe not. So just to have that kind of question on our mind, and from time to time, when we can, look into it more, explore it more.
Is there some way to connect, like a loving kindness meditation, to this exploration? If we can say that we have one part of us that we have to avoid suffering, and then we have some other part of us that's sort of loving ourselves, or we have the feeling, sometimes I have the feeling like I'm too, like I hate myself, or I love myself, that sort of feeling of two. Could that help in sort of seeing that we're just a collection of different mental factors? Would that be helpful to reflect in that way, or is that just totally, you can't combine these two?
No, I think it is. Like I say, the Tibetans don't normally talk about having love and compassion for yourself. But for sure they talk about the importance of having love and compassion for others. And there's no contradiction with emptiness. They say a bodhisattva, this comes in the, for example, the diamond, called the Sangye Khadro Sutra. When the bodhisattva is thinking of becoming enlightened and helping all living beings reach enlightenment as well, but needs to do that within the understanding that there really are no inherently existing or truly existing sentient beings. So it's a tricky thing to do, but that's the ideal. The ideal is to feel love
towards somebody else. It's
yeah. So
the same, who am I loving? If I love you, then
yeah.
who exactly
There
am I
are
loving?
sentient beings. They
Yeah.
do exist. We don't want to negate them, deny them. They do exist, but we need to understand how they exist. They're not like truly existing sentient beings. They're just merely labeled sentient beings. and they do deserve love and compassion and generosity and so forth. So the same with ourself. You know, I don't exist inherently independently, but I do exist relatively conventionally, and I deserve happiness, and I deserve to be taken care of. So I think you know, one could understand it in that way. So they say that if you have the correct understanding, then the method side of the path and the wisdom side of the path actually help each other. You know, your understanding of emptiness, the more you understand emptiness, that actually helps your love and compassion, because you get a clearer understanding of why sentient beings are suffering. They're suffering because they don't understand emptiness. They're completely caught up in these hallucinations, you know, and because of that, they're suffering so much. When you start to clear up your own hallucinations, they say your compassion for others grows even stronger. You really want to help them wake up, you know, out of the dream and see reality, so that they stop suffering. And then your love and your compassion, when you're working on that side of things, that will also enhance your understanding of emptiness, because you realize that your ability to help other sentient beings is limited as long as you don't understand reality, as long as you are still caught in the hallucination of thinking everything is truly existing. So if you really have this love and compassion and you want to help others, you know you have to understand emptiness. You have to develop that side of the path too, because only that way will you be able to get yourself out of suffering, so that you can help others in the best way. So they say if you have the correct understanding, those two sides of the path don't harm each other or contradict each other. They actually support each other. And I also heard this wonderful statement from one of my teachers. He said, if you really, how did it go? If you could see other sentient beings as they really exist, you would have nothing but love and compassion for them. I know, for me that was so powerful, because unfortunately it's hard for me to have love and compassion for every single sentient being. There's some that I find pretty difficult. So for me, that really helped to see how important it is to understand emptiness, the true nature of things. Because if you could really see Donald Trump and Osama bin Laden and Benjamin Netanyahu and all these people as they really are, how they really exist, you wouldn't feel angry and irritated and disgusted by them. You would just feel love and compassion for them. So anyway, another support for the idea of having both sides of the path, method and wisdom. Okay, so let's stop here and do a dedication of our positive energy. So we spent the last couple of hours doing some meditation and thinking about and talking about the path, especially these two main parts of the path, the two factors of method and wisdom, love and compassion on one side and wisdom, understanding emptiness on the other side. So we've just done a little bit of exploration of these topics, but any little bit of thinking about or meditating on these aspects of the path is so helpful, so beneficial, you know, helping us get closer to enlightenment and doing the best thing we can for ourselves and for others. So feel a sense of joy or rejoicing in what we have done, how we've spent our time. Try to feel confident that we really have done a good thing. We have created some good energy, some positive energy. Even if you maybe feel confused and you don't really understand this, but that's okay. It really takes a long time before we can really understand these topics. So again, just be glad that we're trying, we're making the effort to understand them and develop them. So now with this positive energy we've created, let's mentally dedicate it, share it with others, with all living beings, wishing that it will bring happiness and peace to all living beings, freedom from suffering, and will help all of us get closer to enlightenment, which is a state of perfect peace and happiness, the fulfillment of all positive qualities and freedom from all negative qualities, the fulfillment of our highest potential. Okay, so thank you. This has been helpful for you.